Thank you. That was a wonderful introduction. I think can you be available for all my presentations? First of all, it's a great joy to be at the Margaret Mitchell House. What a great honor, to be here where this icon lived. I was here a couple years ago with Sweetgrass, and I toured the Margaret Mitchell House, and I'm sure everyone here has. But for me, I saw this big, beautiful house and thought that's, where the famous Margaret Mitchell lived. And when I toured her apartment, it was amazing to see this tiny little room where this tiny little, manual typewriter where she created this epic novel, Gone with the Wind. And it was a very enlightening experience for me as a writer, because writers, when they meet one another, love to talk about what's your office like? Where do you work? What's your schedule? And we're always worried, where our desk is going to be put. In fact, Stephen King wrote a book on writing, which many of you may have read. If you haven't, it's wonderful. And in that book, he talks about this huge desk he had, like a skating rink of a desk. And he couldn't write on it. And Tabitha, his wife, finally shook him out of his doldrums, and he put his little old ratty desk under the eaves of the roof and began writing novels again. His ego was as big as that desk. So when I realized that Margaret Mitchell could write a book like Gone with the Wind in that little tiny spot, I realized the novel is created here in our minds and here in our hearts. So that was really a wonderful visit for me a couple of years ago when I was introducing you to Sweetgrass. That was also a fun night because that evening I brought with me Elizabeth Bennett and 3 other Sweetgrass basket sewers from the Low Country. What a wonderful evening that was. A lot of the women bought, I think more baskets were sold that night than my books. Those are treasures of the Low Country, and I was happy to talk about it and bring to light this indigenous grass that is fast disappearing from the Low Country. Tonight, I'm going to talk to you about time as a river, and I'm going to bring you not to the Low Country this time, but to the mountains outside Asheville, to the beautiful small streams where trout live. Trout do live in the most beautiful places. When I look back at my body of work, and it's becoming a body of work now, 10, 11, I think actually, someone said the number keeps changing, and I actually do have to go back and start counting, and I have my children's book. Somewhere between 10 and 12, I think it's there for sure. I can see this pattern of my decision to write books that brought my readers to the natural world. Through the setting, the characters, through dialogue and themes, I like to introduce them to some endangered species or some environmental concern. You heard Julie talk about how with the turtles in the beach house, I brought awareness to their endangered situation, and Sweetgrass with the grasses. Yet my stories are not just about nonfiction novels. They're not just about environmental concerns. My novels are centered around people. I love to write about the relationships, the struggles, the failures, the family dynamics, the joys of family relationships. I think I'm deeply concerned right now about the disconnect that I feel is happening with people and the natural world. We witness a strong and steady stream of people migrating from the north to the south. Here in Atlanta, I was driving around doing events today, and I saw all the construction and all the people moving here, and especially along the coast where I live, streams of people coming to the south, wanting to make this new environment their home. And I've seen the new people, whether they're from way far off in the north or just a little bit off. We call it in Charleston, people from off. Do you say that here too? They stand on the wooden parkways or the wooden walkways that border the marshes and the great maritime forests, and they look out at the darkness and they wonder about what lives out there, what critters, what unknown is in the woods. And they don't know, and they're a little afraid of it. But I've learned that they want to know. And I've learned that this is their new home, whether they are carving out a new house and they've come from off, or whether they just are moving into Grandma and Grandpa's house. They still don't know what wild is, but they care. I really believe they care, whether the land is their birthplace or they're from off, as I said. The media has said that more and more people are becoming distant and they don't care. I believe that they're becoming distant. But from all the letters I've received from my readers, the green movement that we're seeing all over the country, Julie mentioned how many people are joining volunteer groups or donating money because of my books. I am on a mission because they're telling me, yes, we care and we want to know more. I think it's because they're hungry in this homogeneous world for a sense of place. And the Southern novel, it's a hallmark of Southern novels, is a strong sense of place. When I prepare to write a novel, I do a lot of hands-on experience. You know, I am a turtle lady, as you learned. I learned how to weave baskets. I fly fish. I try to create a real, authentic world to bring my readers to. So I had to learn to fly fish. I have to admit, I'm a new fly. There's a couple of real pros in the audience. Okay, I'm seeing fingers being pointed. I'm fairly new. I've only been fishing for a few years, so if you look at my video on my website, and please do come to my website, there's lots of videos and trailers to see. I'm not very good, but I love it. I love it. I learned to fly fish a couple of years, about 5 years ago I started, and I had read an article in the newspaper, the Charleston Post and Courier, about a group of women fly fishers. They called themselves the Damsel Fly Fishers. Isn't that a great name, the Damsel Fly Fishers? And I thought, I could just feel that tingle I get when I know I'm hooked by an idea. And I said, you know, my brothers fish, a lot of men I know fish, but I want to learn how to fish. So I called them up. It's typical of me. I just called them up and I asked if I could join them for fishing. And typical of a woman's group, they said, sure, come on, won't you join us? And I did. And the Damsel Fly Fishers took me up to Asheville, where we were on a fishing trip, and I learned to cast. But before I cast my first line out onto the water, I bought a lot of books on fly fishing. I'm kind of a nerd that way. I have to do a lot of academic study whenever I approach a new subject. I learned an awful lot about fly fishing. I learned that it was a woman who wrote the first treatise on fly fishing. Dame Juliana Burner wrote in the 1500s the treatise on fishing with an angle. I think sometimes men have tried to disprove that it was a woman who really did that, but it was. She was a nun. And then there's Cornelia Crosby at the turn of the century. Cornelia Flyrod Crosby. She used to go out fishing, and can you imagine this woman at the turn of the century? And she wore these black dresses, you know, long sleeve, long dresses with a little bustle in the back and a little straw hat. And she went out to these fish camps, which back then were very, very rugged, very rough. And she would report on her experiences in newspapers all throughout the Northeast. So she became famous for her articles. And then there's Joan Wolfe, who's still alive today, a master fly fishing woman who brought grace and the art of dancing to casting. I also learned that there are women fly fishing groups throughout the whole United States. There are many, which excited me. And I also learned that fly fishing is one of the fastest growing sports for women. So, you know, with all this knowledge and armed and excited, I went to the Davidson River outside Asheville, and I learned to cast. Not so well at first. I had that sloppy wrist, which I had to get past. But I stood in the Davidson River early in the morning, and the mist was curling. And I looked up, and I saw the sun dappling through the leaves and on butterfly wings, and it was just so beautiful. And here I am with a camaraderie of other women. And they all went out onto the river, and they found their spot that they were comfortable on the river. And I watched as each woman became engrossed in casting and focused on the details of her environment. They looked where the trees were shadowing the water. They observed the currents, where the rocks were, where the fish might be holding. They picked up pebbles and rocks to see what insects were there or what was around, to see what might the fish be eating. As each of us cast into the water, each of us became totally engrossed, not only with the 4-count rhythm, but with the music of the river, and we all became present in the now. I was just so happy to be on the river. You know, for me, whether I caught a fish or not at that moment was not important to me. I was dancing with the water, dancing with the fish, dancing with the environment. But I caught a fish. Zing! All of a sudden you feel this excitement at the end of the line. It's like adrenaline pumps to your heart. I see the fly fishing women in the back nodding their head. I guess you could say I was hooked. I really felt this visceral connection to life at the end of this line. I had a dance with the rainbow trout, and as you know, with fly fishing, it's catch and release. So my partner and I danced a bit, and then I removed the hook, and I watched it swim away. And I knew that was the moment I wanted to write about. That was the moment, that visceral connection to life that I wanted to bring my readers to. One of the women I fly fished with, and I still do, is a teacher and a guide in Asheville. Her name is Star Nolan of Brookside Guides. Actually, she is the model for Belle Watkins in my novel. And she also runs the retreats for the local Casting for Recovery retreats. And this is a national organization, Casting for Recovery, headquartered in Manchester, Vermont. But it's a national. And there are 37 states that hold retreats for survivors of breast cancer. And each retreat is self-funded. And so if you, here in Georgia, if you are a breast cancer survivor, you know a survivor, and you want to have them participate, which it's totally free for the retreat participants, they apply and they are selected. And about 14 to 16 women get to go to Lake Logan in North Carolina with Star and the volunteers. And imagine, it's this exercise. When you cast, you're exercising muscles that had been damaged during breast cancer treatment. And you also have this physical and, an emotional bond with the women who are with you, the other breast cancer survivors, who may be 5 years out, 10 years out, or more years out beyond their treatment. I volunteered to assist at a retreat. I helped to teach casting, but more than anything, I was a pack mule. These are women who got tired and were, needed water, and my job was just to be there for whatever they needed. More than anything, I think I got so much out of watching them. First of all, in the gear. They have you look like an Orvis model with the gear, with the waders and the vest, and you have all the stuff that no one knows how to use. And that was sort of fun to watch them all get dressed up. But when they caught the fish, I saw that light in their eyes. It just sprang and their color came to their face. And they felt life again after facing death for so long. And I knew that was a magical moment. And one of the survivors at the group talked about how she was grateful for having had breast cancer. Now that took me aback. I was unprepared. I certainly didn't understand that comment. Grateful for cancer? And I looked around the room, and a lot of the other survivors were nodding their head yes. Well, when I went home and I knew that the book would have a heroine who was a breast cancer survivor, I began researching breast cancer, as I always do. I dove into it, and I interviewed survivors. And I found that was not unusual. That was quite a common response. I'm grateful for having had the cancer. Now, what that meant, and I learned from them, was it wasn't that they were grateful for having had the trauma and the chemo and the terrible time they went through. But when they were a survivor, they learned to appreciate each day. They hugged their loved ones every single day. They didn't take living for granted. These women learned to live every day to the fullest. They lived fully in the now. I like to think, and I think the lesson that I teach in the novel, is that they learned not just to survive, they learned to live. And this is the message. I created a character, Mia Landan, for this novel, who is a breast cancer survivor. She lost her breast, she lost her hair, she lost her husband, she lost her job. I really threw the book at her. She lost everything. She feels victimized and lost, and she retreats to this small cabin, this hut in the woods near Asheville. And her purpose is, first of all, to escape. It's like an escape fantasy. We all have that escape fantasy. I do. I want to go to the mountains and be just left alone for a while. But she knew she had to heal, not just physically, but emotionally. And while she's there, she's afraid of that unknown, like I talked about earlier. She doesn't understand. She doesn't know the names of the critters out in the woods, or the snakes, or the noises she hears at night, and she locks all the windows. And she's hot and sweaty, but she doesn't want the night or the darkness to come in. And she's also afraid of her body, that minuscule bit of cancer might come back, that fear. And this is quite common with breast cancer survivors. One survivor described it as being like a child in bed at night, and the boogeyman is under the bed. You can't see it, but you believe it's there. And that is the fear that most survivors have. And healing, in fact, is not on a straight route. It's 2 steps forward, 1 step back, 2 steps forward, 1 step back. And casting, it's not like regular angling with fly fishing. You just don't whip it out there and catch a fish. You cast back and forth, extending the line a little further each time. And that was the metaphor I wanted to use for healing. So as Mia's in this mountain, she picks up a fly rod, and with the help of a local guide, she gets off the couch where she's hovering. She opens the windows to the night air, and she goes out and learns to fish. And while she's in this cabin, she finds on the bookshelf this diary of a sensational fly fishing woman of the 1920s, Kate Watkins. I loved this character. She was so what I want to be out on the river. She's sort of a Kate Hepburn kind of a character. She's full of life. Back in the 1920s, men were not so happy to see women out on the river. It was a male bastion of fly fishing, for a sport for men. But in the 20s, here comes Kate Watkins, who gets out in the river. And not only can she fish, she can fly fish better than the men. And she had this great archetypal male attitude of strength and purpose and self-determination, as compared to Mia, who had the archetypal feminine, the weaker vessel, the 2 steps behind, and she had been victimized. So she reads the words of this strong woman, this Kate Watkins, who is sort of, from my mind, when I created this character, the embodiment of Fly Rod Crosby and Joan Wolfe. You put them together and you get Kate Watkins, a sensational fly fishing woman. And as she reads the diary, and as she reads the newspaper articles and begins to research her life, and hears the stories from the local people who remember her, she hears the words of the wise woman up in the mountains. And Mia grows stronger herself. With knowledge comes power. With skills comes strength. This is Mia's journey of self-discovery. It is a journey that releases the ego and all the fears that she felt hiding under the bed that caused her to lock the windows, to release them and to awaken to a whole new consciousness. And isn't that the hero's journey in a novel? You start the novel off with some sort of a trauma, and then you move through the trials of experience and growth, and then you reach the dramatic climax where the hero has this epiphany, aha, now I know what I really want. And this moment of enlightenment is a call to action for the hero. Mia, the name was chosen for a reason, Mia. Mia is everyman. She's called from being lost. She's pulled away from her self-absorption and self-pity, and goes outdoors to change not only her life, but the lives of her community. And she becomes a pretty good fly fisher en route. She learns what the women at Casting for Recovery had learned, how to live fully in the present. Because we are all survivors. We have all experienced trauma, either the death of a loved one, or a serious illness, or the breakup of a marriage. Some trauma we all survive. And I believe deeply that in nature we can discover again our connection to life and awaken again to life. We need to escape the darkness, and in my novels I try to bring my readers to my story world, to nature and its healing power. It's what I call the power of vista. If I go to the ocean and I look out and I see the great sea and water meet at the horizon, it's like I push a delete button in my mind and my shoulders go down and I'm calmed. Or if you stand out overlooking the mountains with the peaks just peek out of the clouds, and people describe this too about the Grand Canyon, they stand there against all this vastness and you feel a great insignificance. But in that insignificance, you let loose of all the trials and troubles that you brought with you, that loomed so large when you went to the beach to walk it out or to think about life. All of a sudden, it just disappears. And what happens is you become one with this vastness. You feel connected to all nature. And if you can carry that moment of connection with you through the day, you carry that greatness, that release of ego, and you live fully in the present all day long. I like to think that the rains came down on the mountains and the snow melts and then the water comes down the mountains to cascade like lace, and then it gathers at the bottom to form the great rivers. And when you stand in the river, you're standing in the beginning of time. And all that has come before you swirls around your ankles. And then you are in the river now. And then when it moves forward to the future, you are part of the future. But when you're in the river, you're in the present. You're in the now. And that's how I came to the title, Time is a River. And this is the lesson that Mia learned in Time is a River. And the lesson I learned from breast cancer survivors. To not merely survive, but how to live. I'd like to just read a brief excerpt. I think it embodies the whole spirit of my novel. And of course, it's from Kate Watkins. I want to be Kate Watkins when I grow up. It's an excerpt it's one of the articles that Mia had found while looking for who this woman, Kate Watkins, was and what is this great scandal surrounding her. This is an excerpt from On the Fly, her article, from Kate Watkins for the Gazette, April 1925. Spring has come to western North Carolina, and with the migrating birds come the visiting anglers looking for a fine rainbow trout or a big brown or maybe even the elusive brookie. Some are expert at casting, and others are as new as the spring green shoots sprouting up and down the mountains. Yet whether experienced or a beginner, when the water warms and the fish are biting, both are eager to get to the river and start fishing. Before you make that first cast into our streams, I'd like to share with you a lesson I learned from a master fly fisher, my father. Slow down. Get comfortable in the water. When you come to the river, don't jump right in and start tying flies and casting like a drummer with a tom-tom. Most anglers learn straight away how to read the water. My father, however, taught me to listen to the river, especially in the spring when the waters are swollen with high expectations and fractured light sparkles through the greening leaves. Take a moment to look in the early morning mist that curls from the water like smoke, and you will see countless butterflies fluttering. Along the graveled banks, the rocks and wild grass harbor telltale insects. And just beyond, the bright reds and yellows of wildflowers color the landscape. Elusive gray shadows swim upstream, barely visible against the pattern of river rock. Stand a moment longer and listen to the music of the water. Breathe deep, and soon you will catch its rhythm, and your blood will pump its heady beat. As your body hums, your mind releases the nagging worries you carried with you to the river. Thoughts of business and family and work and future slowly drain from you, to be picked up in the current and dragged away. You now feel lighter, freer. You see with fresh eyes. You hear the secrets of the river. You are the river. Now you are ready to connect with fish. Thank you. Thank you. Oh, well, the most fun for me is answering any questions you might have. So please ask questions, and I'd love to answer anything at all, whether fishing or my schedule or what my office looks like. Yes. Thank you. No, bring them in. I'll sign them. That's a really interesting question. A lot of people are curious about that. Are you a budding writer? Are you a writer? Just. Oh, yeah. Well, I'm glad my books bring you that feeling. Where do I write and when do I write? I have an office in my home. And I used to be able to see out over the intercoastal, but now, so many houses are being built up. I'm going to have to build a deck on my roof, I think, to see the intercoastal now. But I live close to the beach. And I'm at my desk every morning at 9 o'clock. That Mary Alice Monroe can be a really tough taskmaster. She makes me show up at 9 o'clock. I don't write the novel every day because I do so much research. So, for example, the book I'm writing right now is about a shrimp boat family. And so I'm out on the boats, I'm interviewing captains, I'm interviewing the wives. I want to bring you behind the scenes of that fascinating world that you don't see. And I'm present to the story, but I have a terrible condition. I'm a very intuitive writer. And so I cannot write until I feel the story well up inside of me. And I know what it is I'm trying to tell you, my readers, through the themes and characters and dialogue. It's what I call the soul of the story. And so I can know the whole story down pat. I know who the characters are. But until I really get... do you remember the movie The Matrix? When he feels he's the one and he sees the Matrix before him. That's how I am when I get the gist of the story. It's like a bolt of lightning, and then I write very, very fast for the first draft. I write for about 4 or 5 months, just nonstop, and my husband eats a lot of bad food, and I'm a wreck when I'm done. But when I'm done, I have the novel on paper. And then I begin rewriting and cutting and pasting, and that's the craft of the novel. But the guts of it's all there. So I'm going to go home when I finish this book tour in the end of July, and I'm ready. I'm geared up. I know this book. And I'm just going to do what I call projectile writing. It's just going to gush out of me. And I'm going to be a wreck when I'm done, but I'm very excited. So I love it. It's a passion. I can't make it better. I keep trying to, my friend says, Mary Alice, just write 8 hours a day, 8 hours a day. And some writers can be very disciplined, and they actually write pages every day. I write every day, but I don't really begin the novel, per se, until I do that push. I sequester myself, and I just write from the heart to you. Any other questions?
In the beach house, I just loved how the turtle explanations at the beginning.
Ah, thank you.
It wasn't preachy.
Yes, thank you.
So educational. Then I just wondered how you just picked each part to then filter into what was going on with the character.
Thank you. She's talking about that at the beginning of especially in the beach house, which was that book was a decision on my part to write a book that educated my readers. And you have to be careful. New York publisher wants you to write a book that's entertaining, and I do write about people. I mean, no one will pick up a Mary Alice Monroe novel because they want to learn about turtles. There are nonfiction books that they can read, but they'll pick up my novel for an emotional read. A story, a mother-daughter story, for example, in that case. But I knew, because I was a turtle lady, that I wanted to educate all the people that came to the beaches about the loggerheads, or in this case about survival and connection, or with sweetgrass about the indigenous species and the grasses and why those baskets are so expensive. You know, so when they buy a basket, they understand the historical value of that basket. So I decided that I would educate and tell her story, and I would put all the factual information as chapter headings. And I can guarantee you it's accurate. You know, I had Sally Murphy from the DNR go over every word, and she, you know, fine-tooth comb. And yet, when you read the book, you still learn a lot about the sea turtle. When that mama turtle is coming out of the ocean, you are there. But I wanted it to be emotional so that when my readers made the emotional contact to the loggerhead, they would go and close that book and say, wow, you know, I cried with Mama, I cried and I cheered, but I learned an awful lot about loggerhead sea turtles. In fact, all along the southeast coast, they call it the training manual for the sea turtle volunteers. And the same thing with Time is a River. I want you to close that book and say, you know, I don't know if I'll ever pick up a fishing rod, although I hope you might. But you learned about the art, and you learned about this fascinating experience of connecting to water. And gee, I might not want to go fishing, but I might go up to the river and walk and look into the streams and understand the fish better and just get off the couch, because I bring the readers from their couches to my world. So with each book, I do something interesting with chapter headings. And in Time is a River, I had it was sort of an amalgam of fly fishing tips. So I didn't want to have a character say, now a hatch is a, and go on and explain it in the novel, because this is a novel, and it would stilt the dialogue. It wouldn't be good writing. But I was able to have, I think maybe Belle Watkins, who's the guide, describe what a hatch was, so the reader could learn it, pay attention or not, but it wouldn't slow up the novel. Because I'm a storyteller first, and the craft of the novel wants the pacing to be good and to engross you in the dynamics between the characters. So when you or someone says to me, you know, I didn't start reading the chapter headings at the beginning of the book, but then I kind of got interested, and I went back and read the chapter headings. Yes. And I'm so excited, because that is seriously a goal of mine, is to get people involved, because I know that people do care, as I said. And I know when you learn about the sea turtles and you come to the Isle of Palms or to Florida and you see a hatching and you're all by yourself out there, and I've gotten letters from people, a nest hatched, and I knew what to do. They're not picking them up and putting the hatchlings in their pockets. They're guiding them to the water. So I feel I'm not a biologist. There are people who know so much more than I do. I do help to rehabilitate sea turtles and raptors, but I'm not an expert. But I'm hoping that my gift, which is to tell the story, I'm the canary in the coal mine, to the public in great numbers, people might move on then to other information and to get involved. Thank you. That was a good question. Yes? Oh, okay.
Aside from the location,
Yes.
two things tonight. One is the sense of the story, the sense of the place, and also nature. And I'm wondering if those things that you found, that those are unique qualities of Southern writing, and if there are others and why you chose this particular genre as your type.
That's an excellent question, and a very highly debatable one. What comprises Southern fiction? I've actually spoken on this topic many times in these big debates, because the South is changing. And as the South changes, so does our writing about the South. I'm known, there are a lot of Southern authors. In fact, right now there's like a renaissance of Southern authors coming up. It's so much fun to read, and we actually know each other and are very supportive. There are a lot of different qualities that I think are hallmarks of a Southern fiction. And off the top of my head, I would say, of course, landscape, which is a hallmark for me, too, as a writer. Quirky characters. In the North, they tend to, if you have a crazy Aunt Sally, she's locked up in the attic, and you don't want anyone to see her. But in the South, she's on the front porch, and people wave to her as they go by. The sense of humor. The South has a history, probably from so many years after the war, of destitution and great poverty. And I think the sense of humor is a hallmark, the strength of character, what was referred to as the steel magnolias. That self-deprecating humor is another hallmark of Southern fiction. Food, definitely, another great hallmark of Southern. So many times I read a Southern novel, and I sure get hungry. And, in my novel, I was also writing a lot about the bakery. I hurt my back, and I was, eating a lot of sweets, and I just writing more and more about baked goods in this book. So I warn you that you're going to want a cinnamon bun when you read this book. There are lots of hallmarks. I think there's even a tongue-in-cheek article that was written about how a true Southern novel has to have a dead mule. It's very funny. Now, I haven't done it yet. I have to figure out how to kill the mule, but when you read a novel of mine and there's a dead mule in it, you'll know I figured that out. So for me, I write about my home and where I live, and that is in the South, and mostly along the coast. Other than that, I think quirky characters, not so much. I think I strive to write towards a universal. I don't believe that a Southern author, for myself, that the story is all that interesting just because it's what is called a regional novel. Regional meaning one particular specific geographical area, and in this case, the Southern being the specific Southern states. For me, a powerful novel is not merely quaint and cute. Especially, we're writing about Southern issues today. The South we know and love, the landscape certainly, is disappearing. So when I write about the South and my landscape that I enjoy, I have to be careful not to write with nostalgia. I can't mask the seriousness of what's going on out there to our landscape that we all love. The landscape that people are moving here to appreciate is endangered. So I refuse to have nostalgia there. So I'm a Southern author and I write about the Southern landscape, but I use what we call universals. So in Sweetgrass, this is a mother trying to save her plantation, save her home, and I'm talking about an indigenous grass that grows in the South for the historical baskets. But if you are a farmer in the Midwest and about to lose your farm, or a rancher out west about to lose your ranch, that universal of trying to hang on to where your family's been for generations and you have a collective identity, that's the universal. The mother trying to save her family, the place where grandma had dinner on Sunday nights, that's the universal. The healing from breast cancer, I made Mia a survivor. But we're all survivors. Nature heals. I'm writing to the universal for every woman and every man to get up off the couch and go outdoors, appreciate this landscape, become part of it, know the names, make them your friends, make this planet your home. Because when you do, you'll fight for her. Yes? Oh my, and that was a tough example. My research. Research for me is always on a three-pronged level. One is the academic. I buy lots of books. My house is overcrowded with books. So I dive in and just learn about the subject academic. And then that's the inward. Then I go out and I do interviews. I talk to anybody who will listen, who will let me talk. Shrimp boat captains, it's funny, the reason I laughed is they're a pretty tight-mouthed group. And it took me a very long time to crack that nut, really. And it was a woman who broke down the door, the daughter of a shrimp boat captain, Magwoods in Shem Creek. And she introduced me to her father, Wayne Magwood, and he brought me to the docks, and all the captains were, looking at me. And unfortunately, I kind of looked like this, which was the wrong outfit to wear. I should have come with, and I did later, with my jeans and my T-shirt and my white rubber boots, and I just helped paint, and I went out on the boats, and I kept my mouth shut. And I just listened to the stories. And then I became more friendly with them, and they opened up. And then once they found out that I was going to write a book and talk about the situation that they are in now with imported shrimp and the high diesel fuel and, you know, people not aware of their situation, not eating locally, they wanted me to tell their story, and then they started opening up. But the women, as always, tell the stories. And I find that if you're a writer has to be a good listener. When I'm beginning research, my antennas are up. I don't really know what the story is going to be about. I just knew it was going to be about a shrimp boat. That's pretty broad. I didn't know that it was going to, you know, until I went out on the boats and I met the captains and I wanted to meet the women, and I heard their side of the story, what goes on behind the doors. It's almost cult-like, this family, that they're very close bond between shipboat captains, very loyal to one another. And it wasn't until I heard their stories and I heard their hearts and their concern. And then I go into my home and it's very introspective. I shut down and I walk and I think, and it's introspective, and I pray a lot. And I know what the story is. And I tell that story. It's, for example, with Time is a River, I didn't know it'd be about breast cancer survivors. I was hooked on fly fishing. It was originally going to be a bunch of women who go fly fish together. And then my research brought me to Casting for Recovery. And from Casting for Recovery, the light bulbs went on. And then I knew, the epiphany, now I know what the story is really about. So I never let anyone do my research for me. The hands-on. It's different for every writer. You just have to be patient and not force the questions. When I interview people, I don't have a long list of questions. I like to listen and let the story come to me. You've got to trust the story. Any other questions? Yes?
How do you pick your subject?
How do I pick my subject? When I finish a novel, I'm always sort of angling around for the next, what's out there, right? And, for example, I'm finishing this book about the shrimp boat. I haven't even really finished. I'm still writing it. But I already know what the next book is because it's like my antennas are out. And when I get the idea, I tingle. I have story ideas like planes on a runway waiting to take off. I know what I want to write about. I wanted to write the shrimp boat story for a long time, but I had to wait till the time was right. Whether it's, for me, it was turtle excluder devices. I've been battling with shrimpers for years because of TEDs. And to me, the shrimpers are heroes now. They have the TEDs on their boats, and they are participating in saving turtles. And now I can write the story from a different point of view. So you just sort of have to trust. Again, I'm a very intuitive writer, and I know when the time is right. Manatees, I want to write a story about manatees. Those big sea cows are so sweet, and they're endangered and in trouble and getting hit by boats. I have a lot of stories I want to tell, but I wait for the moment. So Time is a River. I'm finishing this book about shrimp boat captains. I already know what the next book is going to be about. I promised my editor I wouldn't say. And starting January, I begin my research. And I don't know what the story is. So, for example, with Turtle Summer, when I wrote the swimming lessons, I knew I wanted to write about this journal for young children everywhere because they're the stewards of tomorrow. So I wrote Turtle Summer. And I was so successful. I just won the ASPCA award. And I'm very proud because it sort of said to me, all right, you have an audience for children. And teachers are using it in the schools. So I know when I write certain books, I will write children's books to go along with it. So I have that earmarked in my mind because they're, again, the stewards of tomorrow. I want to excite them the same way I excite adults. But beyond, I may have 3 or 4 on the runways. Which one's going to take off first? I don't know. And I might come across an article tomorrow that blows me away and sweeps everyone one bag. It's intuition. Hi. She came from Paris. I have a fan in Paris. I'm very excited. Yes.
I have a question. I hear you speaking of intuition and trust and faith. Many themes that I've read in your books and themes that I try to live by a day at a time. But as a writer and as a young
in modern society, I find that I relate very much to having ideas all the time, all these ideas and things, and not just of things to write, but things to do and to visit and to see and to meet. And I don't know that at this point in my life, I think that something that I suffer from is not having the belief that I will arrive at a point to do something.
Oh, wow, what an interesting comment.
If
Can you all hear?
if you found that you had did the action follow immediately the ideas, I guess is my question for you.
I hear two questions. One about you, when am I ready to tell the story? When am I ready to begin to write? Is that the question, too? I've always been a writer. There are really two kinds of writers, those who write from being a child. They say I always wrote, and those who come to it later in life. I happen to be a little girl who always wrote stories, but I was shy about it. I stuck them under my bed, and I didn't share them, and I went into journalism first, and I wrote nonfiction. And I always wanted to write a novel, have a Japanese novel. We were joking about it earlier. I know I'm going to tell. But it wasn't until I was pregnant with my third child, and I was put to bed for months, 4 months. And my husband, you know how sometimes you change the dining room to the to the room where the bed goes because they don't want to go up and down the stairs? So my husband took the TV out. He's a psychiatrist. And no, I didn't kill him because I was in bed. I couldn't get out of bed. And he said, Mary Alice, for as long as I've known you, you wanted the time to write a novel. Now's the time. So I was sort of forced upon the time, but I always wanted to write. But I was in my 30s, and I didn't have the courage, I don't think, the confidence to write a novel. I could write nonfiction. But I didn't know that I knew what it was I wanted to say in the novel, because I always have a message, at least for me, that makes me turn the pages as a writer. So it wasn't until I was in my 30s, my late 30s, I really felt ready to write the novel. I did write on my back, my first novel, talk about Margaret Mitchell. Mine was written with a yellow legal pad and a pencil on my back. It's no fancy office for me. It was published. I was very fortunate, and I recognize that. When I made the decision to write books about nature in particular, with this as a backdrop for my human stories, I go to nature and I let the ideas simmer. You know the way a turtle nest hatches? You have all the eggs in the nest, 8 each, 150 eggs, and they're all they sit there until they start rumbling and they start to hatch, and the action gets all the other turtles, to hatch from the eggs. This is all under the sand, and they sort of instigate each other, and it's like spontaneous. And over the course of several days, the top turtles will dig the sand away, and the other ones will push the sand down, and the turtles on the bottom pat it down, and the whole nest rises to the top like an elevator. Isn't nature just so beautiful? And then they rest at the top until some spark that we don't know what it is causes them to come out in a boil. Sometimes they come out in dribs and drabs, but when they come out like in a huge bunch and they race like a fan out to the water, it's what we call a boil because it looks like a pot boiling over. That's kind of what it was like to write a novel. You get all the ideas bubbling inside of you, and you kind of sift away all the sand, and you kind of wait till the moment's right. When you'll know, and you just have to boil. Ooh. You just have to let the ideas out. Don't labor day after day on the first sentence. Don't waste your time going over the first 3 chapters until it's perfect. Write the whole thing. Write chapter by chapter. Get it out. The craft comes in rewriting. Have faith. You'll listen to yourself. And it doesn't have to be perfect. Just when you feel the urge, put the words and let the words guide you. Chapter by chapter. Don't think of it as a book. Think of it as, what am I going to tell now? What's my story today? What do I have to do now? Any other questions? All right, then. Hopefully I'll sign some books. Thank you for coming.